All right, I think it's on now. All right, so if Calloway was a Bible character, as I explained last week that Calloway is our golden retriever, and so what we are doing in this series is we are looking at some different characteristics of Calloway, and then what we're doing is this: we're matching up that different characteristic each week with a Bible character that has the same characteristic. And so last week we looked at this one. If Calloway was a Bible character, he could be the Ethiopian eunuch. And the reason for that is because Calloway is a very curious dog. He has to know everything that's going on. He has to make sure everything is good. So he checks everything out. And so when we looked at the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts chapter 8, we saw his curiosity by asking questions to Philip about what he was reading from the book of Isaiah the prophet so that he could understand what he was reading. And so today what we're going to see, if Calloway was a Bible character, he could be Moses. Calloway is a pretty big dog. I know there are bigger dogs than Calloway for sure, but he is a bigger dog. For a golden retriever, he's probably the biggest one of the family that he has, where he comes from. Right now he weighs around 90 pounds. So he's a pretty big dog, pretty strong dog. And for a 90-pound dog, he's full of energy. He's fast, he's quick, he's athletic, he loves to jump around at things. He has a lot of energy for that size. Now, with that being said, none of those things I just mentioned will be one of the characteristics we're talking about today, but they do kind of come into play as far as being strong and things like that. What we're going to see today is that Calloway could be Moses because he's gentle. I consider Calloway to be this gentle giant for us because of his size, but also just how he is around smaller things, whether it's a small child or a small dog. It's like he understands his size, and he knows not to go full speed Calloway with smaller things like he would with me. So let's see if our video here will play today of Calloway. Can't really hear the sound. So the sound you couldn't quite hear on those, obviously. But when you think about the word gentle, this is how I want us to think of being gentle. I want us to think of this as strength under control. Notice in those video clips how Calloway was with and how he is with small dogs like Lily and Maisie there. And trust me, I have plenty of other videos where he chases them, those little dogs around the house. Now, not to try to attack them, but they tease him, and they'll walk up to him, they'll start walking away and looking at him and run, and then he'll chase them around the house, back and forth, down the hallway, all around. Maisie and Lily, they can both run under the couch, and he can't get under there, obviously. They'll come out the other side, so he has to pop around the other side to try to catch them. Or they may slip under the dining room table and get in the middle right there and just look up at him, and he can't get in there because of the chairs around the table. They have him running around so much, stop and change directions. As big as he is, he can't stop on our floors, so he slides, and his feet are they look like the cartoons where you're just trying to gather your feet to change your directions. Then there are videos where you saw them like gently wrestling, where they really wrestle. And they play wrestle, and he will open his wide, and if you don't know better, you're thinking their head off, and he just gently places his teeth like on the back of their neck so they can turn around and do it. Or he'll let them just, while he's standing up, they stand up on their back legs and put him and just stand up with him. So he's very gentle. He's a very gentle big dog with these little ones. It's really understands his size, and he knows just not to go full. Calloway was a Bible character, though. He could be Moses, because we're going to see today how Moses was a leader. Moses had strength under control, very in a powerful position, obviously, his last 40 years of his life in a position of power, yet he had to have all that power, all that strength under control. And so our focus verse for today, if you want to call it this, is from Numbers 12, verse 13, where it says, "Now the man Moses was very meek, more than all people who were on the face of the earth." The version I read from here is the English Standard Version. Other versions will use the word, a word, instead of using meek, they might use a different word to describe Moses as well. The King James, I believe, uses meek. Other versions might use the word humble. I actually prefer the word meek. But no matter which word it is that the version uses there, it shows us what type of person Moses was. He was humble, he was meek, he was gentle as a leader among the Israelites. He cared about other people, and he had compassion for other people, as we will see. But here's the kicker. Moses had to learn to be this way. This was not something I believe he was like just born with. I want us to think about it this way. In our day and time here in America, many people don't teach that you need to be gentle to get to the top. In fact, it's just the opposite that our young people are taught. It's this survival of the fittest mentality that says to be the best, you've got to look the best, you've got to talk the best, and you've got to beat everyone else to get there. That's how it's done. And so because of this mentality, and as our country has abandoned more and more Christian morals and values, we as Christians have become really known around the world as a nation of people who are rude, inconsiderate, and hateful. That's how many people think of us. Now, our focus on being humble and gentle can get lost because we end up focusing on wanting to be the best by the standards of this world. But God doesn't see it the same way. See, in today's world, we tend to think of meekness, gentleness as being weak. It's a sign of weakness if you are gentle and meek towards someone. But that's not the case. When you read the words in the New Testament, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth," those are words of Jesus. Some versions, the New American Standard Bible, which I usually read from, it says, "Gentle, for they shall inherit the earth." Yet somehow we have turned being gentle and being meek into a sign of being weak, a sign of weakness. But gentle is not about being weak. It's about strength under control. In America, in recent decades, we have become just the opposite, I think, of what God wants of us. Instead of being gentle in recent decades, we have become just the opposite. Instead of being gentle and having strength under control, people have become prideful and arrogant. And those are not signs of strength. They're absolutely not signs of being gentle and weak. Instead, those are signs of being, they're actually not signs of being gentle and meek. Instead, they are signs of being weak when we are prideful and arrogant. Now, when you get back to Moses, think about his life and what it was like as we'll look at this for a couple of minutes. He was born in a time at the beginning of the book of Exodus where the Israelites were becoming too numerous. They were becoming a very large group of people as slaves in Egypt. And so they were made slaves, but they were becoming too strong. There were becoming too many Israelites around there. So to keep them from continuing to grow, Pharaoh gave the order that every boy, every Hebrew boy, every boy of the Israelites that was born should be thrown into the river. But Moses' mother hid him in a basket. After placed that basket on the bank among the Nile River. And the daughter of Pharaoh comes by and spots him. And she ends up not knowing that it's Moses' mother, I guess, having Moses' mother nurse him. And then Moses' mother gives him to the daughter of Pharaoh to be her son. Now, I say all that for this understanding. To understand the life of Moses, we have to understand what this was like. In our world, time learning to be gentle and humble, because it's just not what we are told gets us to the top. For Moses, he would have grown up in a very similar situation. Remember I said earlier that I think Moses had to care for others, to have compassion like he did. And I think the reason for that is because of the environment that he grew up in. You see, everything he learned at a young age, up until really the age of 40, everything he learned came directly from the teaching of the Egyptians. And not only the Egyptians, but straight from the house of Pharaoh, with him being known as the son of the daughter of Pharaoh. So he would have learned their language, he would have learned their culture, and we see just how ruthless Pharaoh was by giving the order that all Israelite or Hebrew boys would be thrown into the Nile. See, Moses was not being taught to be gentle and humble as he was growing up. He was not taught to have compassion for people during this time. These are people who owned the Israelites as slaves, you know. But God had other plans for Moses. See, when Moses was around the age of 40, as we read in the Bible, he saw an Egyptian beating one of his fellow Hebrew slaves, one of the Israelites. And Moses kills that Egyptian. And when Pharaoh finds out about it, Pharaoh tries to kill Moses. So what does Moses do? He flees. He runs away and goes to the land of Midian. And at the land of Midian, he becomes a shepherd for the next 40 years. And I believe that it's during this time and even afterwards that God was at work making him into the man who would lead his people out of Egypt. I think it was during this time that Moses was learning that being a great leader is not about just being on top, but it's about compassion. It's about caring for others. Being a great leader is about learning to be gentle with this. And I believe that Moses was learning this during these years. See, because that's what a shepherd had to be if they were going to be a shepherd. A shepherd was someone who cared for their flock. A shepherd cared for their flock of sheep so much as if it was their own children. No wonder so many of the great leaders in the Old Testament that we read about were shepherds. From Abraham's family down the line to Moses to King David, we see shepherds, leaders who had power, that were in powerful positions, but were gentle. They had their strength under control. And so it becomes easy, I think, to see and understand later on why Jesus would call himself the Good Shepherd. Because you see in Jesus a man full of compassion, a man who cared for others, a man who was gentle. The only two people mentioned in the Bible as gentle are Moses and Jesus. So Moses spends 40 years doing this work of a shepherd until God appears to him in that burning bush to give Moses his next orders, to go to Pharaoh and tell him to let the Israelites free from their bondage of slavery. Now we understand Moses did not want to do this. He tried to get out of it. He made excuses. He asked God questions about and gave him reasons for why he wasn't the best. But this was God's plan, and this was God's timing. And so Moses had learned now at this point all that he needed to learn, I believe. From learning the Egyptian ways, from knowing their lifestyle, their culture and everything, to learning now how to care and lead as a shepherd. Now his final task would be to care and lead the Israelites out of slavery, and then to lead them for the next 40 years and this was no easy task. See, Moses would face so many hurdles, so much opposition, not only from Pharaoh, but even from his own people during these next 40 years. And so when the people complained while they were in the wilderness for those 40 years, their complaints were against Moses and against God. And there were times where God would become angry with the people of Israel to the point where God was ready to just strike them down, to do away with them. But Moses would always step in. Being this gentle leader, he would step in, he would go to God on their behalf to spare their lives. And this happened way too often. But I want our focus to be on one of those moments for the rest of our time here today briefly. Remember, for our focus verse from Numbers 12:3, it says, "Now the man Moses was very meek, more than all the people of the face of the earth." And it's very interesting what is going on here at this time. Remember that Moses is the leader of this entire nation, this entire group of people. Many say it could be up to 2 million people at this time. But in the first two verses of Numbers chapter 12, we read this. "Then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. And they said, 'Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well?' And the Lord heard it." This can't be good. Miriam and Aaron here, they are Moses' brother and sister. And what we see here is some jealousy really setting in. They're upset, we read about first, that they're upset that Moses had married a Cushite woman. A Cushite woman is said to be really an Ethiopian woman, someone that would be from a place just south of Egypt. So they speak out against Moses because they're upset with him because he married this woman. And what is it that they are saying? In verse 2, you can see their jealousy as they question really whether Moses is the only one that God is using here. This takes place pretty early on during their time in the wilderness. From what I've read, if they were in the wilderness for 40 years, from what I've read, this took place maybe in the second year after they had come out of Egypt. And they're right in saying that God has used them as well, but they were not placed in the same position as Moses was when he was placed there by God. God specifically chose Moses for this job. Now, how would you respond if you were Moses? How would most people respond if they were the clear leader? I think many people in our world today would, in that position, they would try to come down pretty hard on them to prove a point, to make a statement, to let others know that this is not acceptable. But what we read in that next verse, remember in that third verse, is that Moses was meek. He's gentle more than anybody else on the face of the earth. Now, how that second verse ended there, notice that. It says that the Lord heard it. He heard what Aaron and Miriam were saying. And this is important because, in a way, they were questioning if Moses was really able to fulfill this role of spiritual authority over the children of Israel. And so when we read about Moses and their long journey in those 40 years, you can kind of get the feeling and see that Moses really, it's not his nature to just step out and defend himself immediately. So here God steps in. God heard what they said. And I'm just going to tell you what happens in verses 4 through 10 without reading them. When God heard what Aaron and Miriam were saying, he tells all three of them, Moses, Miriam, and Aaron, to come forward to the tent of meeting. And when they do, he has Aaron and Miriam come forward while God comes down in a pillar of a cloud. And God tells Aaron and Miriam, basically, he says, listen, I may let other people know what I want done through a vision or a dream. I may let people know that in a vision or a dream. He said, but with Moses, it's different. With Moses, he said, I talk directly to Moses, and Moses talks to him. And God asked them really, why were you not afraid to speak out against my servant Moses? We even read in the 9th verse that the anger of the Lord burned against Aaron and Miriam so much, and God departed. But God didn't leave them without showing fully how angry he was with them. When the cloud was gone from over this tent of meeting, Miriam was leprous. We read she was white as snow. So she's got this disease now that there's no cure for. So, I don't know why only Miriam was leprous. Some suggest that maybe she's the one who was the most vocal against Moses. I don't know. We don't read that here. But talk about being put in your place. God put them in their place immediately. So much so that this is what we read in verses 11 through 12. Then Aaron said to Moses, he said, "Oh my Lord, I beg you, do not account this sin to us, in which we have acted foolishly and in which we have sinned. Oh, do not let her be like one dead whose flesh is half eaten away when he comes from his mother's womb." Leprosy was a terrible disease. It would eat your flesh away. And so now Aaron and Miriam, they get this point. And notice who it is that Aaron is begging here for help. He is begging Moses to step in for them. They understand now that they are not in the same position as Moses. Even though they have been used by God, God is working directly through Moses. It's one of those situations where you want to just say, maybe you should have thought before you acted. Maybe you should have stopped and thought before you said those words. Here, Aaron doesn't just admit to being wrong, but he says we've acted foolishly and we have sinned. Now, put yourself in the shoes or in the sandals of Moses at that day and time. You're the leader of this entire nation of people. And this is the perfect time to show your power, your authority. With your own siblings, you have the opportunity now to show everyone that you have full authority. You can look at your brother who has just begged you to help them, and you could say, "Sorry, bro. Actions have consequences, and sis deserves it." Maybe if Moses was still growing up in Egypt and living by their standards, maybe if he was growing up in our world today, maybe he would have said something like that to Aaron. But this Moses has learned to be meek, humble, and gentle. And this is what the 13th verse tells us. Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, "O God, heal her, I pray." Now, in all of this story, we don't have Moses saying a single word until this right here, the 13th verse. And when he finally does speak, it's pleading to God on behalf of his accusers to heal Miriam. On behalf of the ones who are making things difficult for him. The one time he does speak, it's on their behalf. This is the type of gentleness and humility that Moses led these people of Israel with for 40 years while they were in the wilderness. On several occasions during these years, Moses went to God, had to go to God on behalf of the people of Israel, even after they had complained against him. That's the type of leader Moses was. If you want to have this type of gentle heart, it comes down to really submission to God. Let's make sure we don't see being gentle as being weak. Being gentle is what God expects of his creation, of all of his children. Moses was gentle, but he was not weak. See, there are times when people need to stand up and defend themselves, of course. But that should be done after seeking God's guidance and asking God how he wants us to do it. Moses learned to be gentle. Being gentle is not just something that we can or should be. Being gentle is It has to be a part of us. It has to be a part of who we are as Christians. No question. See, as Christians, we know that God is a great helper in His Holy Spirit. We have something that those outside of Christ just don't have. We have the Spirit of God that dwells in us as believers. And notice what the Spirit brings to us in Galatians 5, 22 and 23. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. You notice how the 23rd verse starts there? Gentleness. Being gentle is one of the fruits of the Spirit. And so if we are Christians, if we're believers in Jesus Christ, who have the Spirit of God inside of us helping us, one of the fruits of that Spirit that we should be having is gentleness, strength under control. I read this about gentleness, and I think it sounds like Moses. It said, gentleness signifies strength under control, characterized by humility, meekness, and submission to God, rather than being weak or soft. It is an internal, powerful attribute that leads to outward actions of kindness, grace, and careful, respectful treatment of others. The fruit enables believers, this fruit of gentleness enables believers to respond to difficult people and situations with love and consideration, contrasting with worldly hostility and anger. That's Moses right there in a nutshell. Really? How much hostility, how much anger, how many times did difficult people come at him? Did they make his role more difficult? Yet every time he had his strength under control. And he prayed to God for these people. Now, after Moses pleads with God to heal Miriam, we read that Miriam was placed outside the camp for 7 days, so that before she could be received back into the camp. Those 7 days was what the law called for, really, for people who had something, a disease or something like leprosy. These 7 days were a time of confinement. It was a period of purification, really, before they could come back and be seen if they're leprosy. And so something all good leaders must do is be willing to do the things necessary for the good of others, for the people they are leading. That's what you see in Moses. He was God-fearing, and with that came gentleness. No wonder Moses is revered, even to this day, as one of the greatest Israelites to ever walk the face of earth. If Calloway was a Bible character, it could have been Moses. Just as Moses was gentle in all that he did and how he treated and handled situations, Calloway is gentle. Moses didn't let his power or his strength get out of control. He was constantly willing to do whatever was necessary for the good of those around him. Calloway and Moses, they both had their strength under control. I want to thank you for joining us for week 2 of our If Calloway Was a Bible Character. We've got 3 more weeks left of this, and then we'll go into our Something for Thanksgiving, a little series about being thankful there for Thanksgiving for a few weeks leading up to that holiday. But, God calls all of us to be gentle people, and, He gives us His Holy Spirit as His believers, and as those who have placed their faith in Jesus, to have gentleness. If you've never placed your faith in Jesus, to confess Him, to repent, to be immersed, reach out to us and let's make it happen so you can have that gentleness that comes only from God. We're going to stand and we're going to sing our hymn of invitation. We're going to sing the first and last verses of song number 331, Wherever He Leads, I'll Go.